Hey, it's episode 4 of the ASKJV Podcast. Today we're talking about room treatment, the loudness wars, my mic suggestions for scream vocals, and how to come up with unique and cool special effects for mixes. So let's get into it.
3, 2, 1.
This is the ASKJV Show.
Our first question comes from Yavin. How do you know when you reach the right amount of room treatment? I can never tell if I have too much or not enough. Any tips for figuring out when you have the right amount?
Well, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule and way of knowing when you've got the right amount of room treatment. Ultimately, you just got to do the best job with the room and the budget that you have available to you. For me, it was just, putting up a bunch of panels like the one you see behind me here, and, put them in the corners, put them on the walls, and eventually just my room sounded good, and I found that it wasn't distracting anymore. And at that point, I just forgot about the room treatment and just kept working. So I'd say that's how you know when you have the right amount. Put some stuff up. If you're still noticing weird sounding reflections and noticing your mix isn't translating, then keep adding stuff. And then once you get to that point where you feel like your mix is translating well and you're hearing things properly and the room itself is not distracting, then you're good. You can just keep working and not worry about it anymore. I think it's something that a lot of people overthink. And to be honest, even the big major studios out there, there's problems with those rooms too, and I've been in them. I've been in rooms that have been professionally designed, tons of money put into them, and they have obvious issues that you need to be aware of. And of course, you just get used to them, and maybe they're not massive issues that we would find in like a small bedroom studio, but they still exist. There's no such thing as a perfect room, so don't overthink it. Just treat your room until it starts sounding the way that you want and your mixes are translating, and then you're good to go.
This question comes from Maddie. What are your thoughts on the loudness war when mastering? Do record labels still force you to do it?
It's not something that I've had to deal with. I've certainly never had a label complaining that a finished record wasn't loud enough. Part of the reason is because I don't really master my own mixes, hardly ever. I always send them to a professional mastering engineer that I trust, and they always make it loud enough anyways. But you know what? I've even asked him about it, and he said it's not really an issue these days, especially in this genre, because you're not necessarily on the radio, which is where the loudness wars came from to begin with, right? People are used to listening on iTunes and on their, iPhones or whatever, and they can turn up the volume easily themselves, and a lot of these programs will automatically match the volume anyway. So I think it's less of an issue today than people think. And, of course, another part of that is just we've kind of reached that threshold where things are as loud as they can without just getting super, super distorted and sounding horrible. And most records end up being that loud now. So it's just kind of a given. It is what it is. And it's not really something that's on the forefront anymore. Not something that I ever have to deal with. So yeah, you definitely have to compete with loudness, but maybe not as much as you think. I don't think the average listener is really going to notice, an extra dB or two of headroom in a mix, and they might actually end up liking it more and listening more in the long run. So it's something to experiment and keep an eye on for sure. I've heard a lot more records these days that are a little bit quieter, and it's cool to see. August Burns Red Constellations, I think, is one that really stands out. That's significantly quieter overall compared to other records in the genre, and there's I've never seen anyone online or otherwise talk about the fact that this record is quieter. It seems that people don't even really notice that. So that's my answer to that. Not an issue for me.
Ethan asks, what mic do you recommend for harsh vocals? Cheap option and more expensive?
For screaming vocals, which I'm pretty sure is what you're talking about here, I've got to recommend the SM7B. That's what I've used for years and years, and lots of other people use as well. It sounds great on screams and also on singing too. I've owned U87s and other expensive condenser mics, and I've ended up selling them and just using the SM7 on pretty much everyone, no matter what the genre is. One of the big reasons it's great for screamers too is because they can be right up on it. It's actually right behind me here. You can see that mic, see how it has the foam cover there. Screamers can hold the mic like this and be right up on it, screaming like similar to what they do in a live show, which is a huge thing, compared to being standing back like this from a condenser mic and screaming and trying to sound natural. It's just harder for them. So a big part of getting good vocals is having the vocalist feel really comfortable and being able to get into it. So SM7B, I'd say it's on the cheap side. It's, under a few $100, especially if you buy it used. So that's definitely my number one recommendation. The other one I'd say is that's surprisingly good on screen vocals is the 421, which is mostly known for being a tom mic. But it's also a dynamic mic like the SM7, and if you put a foam pot filter on it, you can use it the same way as the SM7 here. Get the person to just hold it in their hand or on a stand and be right up on it, and it's got a little filter switch on the bottom, and if you turn that 1 or 2 clicks, it filters out some low end, and it just sounds super aggressive and gritty and awesome on screen vocals. So I've used that on some records as well. You can check out, I think, Silverstein, This Is How the Wind Shifts. We did all the screams with the 421 like that, and it turned out great. I really like how that mic sounds on vocals as well, and that's also a couple $100 option.
Our last question comes from Ryan. I would love to know your approach on coming up with effects to put into your mixes. Are there tricks out there other than the typical reverse snares, cymbals, stutter edits, and bass drops that we don't know about?
Cool question, Ryan. In short, there's no real secret to coming up with this stuff. A lot of it is inspired by other effects that I hear on other records, and then I'll try to take that as inspiration and then try to mimic, but just tweak it a little bit in my own mix. A lot of stuff like the auras, a lot of that, what you're talking about. That EP has a lot of those interesting effects and edits and whatnot. And a lot of that came from the band actually being there in the room, because I recorded it as well as mixed it. And they had a lot of ideas for that stuff as well. So it was sometimes going back and forth with them and trying out weird stuff and just going through different sounds to see what stuck. So that helps a lot. It's when you have other people, obviously the artists beside you kind of giving their input and saying, hey, why don't you try this? You end up going down a rabbit hole that maybe you don't expect or that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. So input from other people definitely helps with being creative in that stuff. Otherwise, I do have a specific way I do this when I'm just mixing. I save that stuff till near the end of the mix so that it doesn't distract me early on. So I get the mix sounding super solid, and then usually by that time, I'm a couple hours into the mix and it's sounding pretty solid, and I probably in the course of listening to it a bunch of times, I might have got some idea in my head of some weird sound that I'm hearing in my head, and at that point near the end of the mix, I take some time to try that, because I know I might end up going down a path for 10-15 minutes that may not even end up working. It may not even I might not be able to achieve the sound in my head and just forget about it, or it might not suit the song in the end anyway. So I don't want to get off track with that stuff early on. I save it to the end of the mix process. And it's really just, I don't know, I've got to hear it in my head first. And sometimes, for a lot of mixes, I don't hear any, special effects in my head. I just kind of leave the song as is, and that's okay too. You don't always have to try and fit crazy, weird effects into your songs. It has to serve the song. And honestly, there's been tons of times where I've heard a weird effect in my head and thought it would be cool, put it into the mix, and then, as I'm about to finalize the mix, I'm listening through one last time, and I delete it because it just doesn't work well. It was just something I heard in my head that it didn't actually serve the song. So just follow your gut. If your instinct's telling you to try something weird, then try it out. Load up whatever plugins and stuff and mess around for a little bit. And if it clicks, then go with it. If not, just get rid of it and move on. But no secrets. It's just your creativity and creativity of other people playing off each other as well, and that's what leads to those cool effects in the mixes. That's it for this week. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and leave a comment. You can leave a question there for next time. Hit the like button. Give me some feedback. I love hearing from you guys and love doing this show, so keep the questions rolling in at AskJVPod.com. If you're listening on iTunes or on your podcast app, make sure you're subscribed there so you don't miss all the episodes that are coming out every week. And if you want to help me out, you can leave a review on iTunes for this podcast, and that's going to help other people find it as well. One last thing, if you're listening to this on the week that it comes out, I'm doing a giveaway for my drum samples. So I have a bunch of drum samples for sale that I've made specifically for heavy music. I've used them on tons and tons of records. I'm going to be giving away a package of all of them. So I think about $150 value. I'm running a contest right now. I'm going to give away a bunch of copies of that. So click the link in the description here to make sure you enter that contest and get a chance to win those drum samples. Otherwise, guys, I'll see you next week on the next show.